So one of the gifts of teaching remotely online at our university, they call it emergency remote online teaching. It's what we've been doing since March 2020 when we went into our first COVID-19 lockdown. But one of the benefits of that is that I can, number one, redeem a lot of time. I'm no longer spending 2 hours a day or close to that commuting to the university and back. And so that gives me a lot of extra time. But it also means that I get to structure my time to be as productive and as free as I want to at different times during the day. And so, being able to go for a little walk in the morning or later in the day is one of the gifts of this mode of teaching and learning. Now, of course, one of the aspects that's not so great about it is that I find myself spending a lot of time that would have been free time, sitting behind my computer, my little screen in the corner of my office, working on lectures, recording lectures. I'm doing a lot more online lectures for people all around the world, whereas previously one would have had to travel for that. It seems that online lectures and being present virtually has been legitimized. And that's a good thing, I think, for the environment. But it also means that I'm trying to cram in a lot more than I previously have. I mean, if you look at my publication list, you'll see that over the last year or so, I've published a whole lot more, written a whole lot more, and spoken at many more events. And of course, each of those things has to fit in alongside my regular work, which is teaching my own students, supervising my graduate students, and administering the work of the Beyers Naudé Center for Public Theology and my department. So it's not all a benefit, but there are some pluses that I quite enjoy. Although we are starting to go back to the office more and more. In fact, this week I'll be at the office for 4 days, and I'm grateful for that as well. We adhere to very careful COVID-19 safety protocols, and it's just good to be around people in carefully controlled ways again. Someone just came running past, so I just quickly stuck on my mask just to be responsible, a good citizen. Now, what I'd like to talk about very briefly today is an article which I had published last week in Counterpoint Knowledge. It's a Berlin-based academic website, and what they tend to do is ask scholars from around the world who are researching various things to summarize and present some of their research. And I've just recently written a chapter based on the notion of dissenting Protestants, so Protestant Evangelicalism, and the Merit Trap. So let me quickly tell you about this article. One of the things that's been very interesting, and I cite in the article, I'll put a link to it by the way, is that recent research has shown that in countries where the sort of life experience has increased, so measures such as economic income and health services and people are living longer, eating better food, where that has increased, life satisfaction has actually decreased. Now that seems to be a rather incongruous metric. You'd expect if things got better, people would feel better. But that seems not to be the case. So what this particular research has shown is that particularly in countries such as Britain and France, America, Australia, places like that, even though life has got better on certain metrics, people are more and more unhappy. Now, Hartmut Rosa, who wrote a very important book called Resonance, seems to suggest that one of the reasons for that is that we're facing increasing acceleration in the world. So in order to sustain the kind of world in which we live, we have to increase production. We also have to increase consumption. And we have to increase all of the work that we do around that to sustain a lifestyle that consumes and produces more. And so one of the things that we find in ourselves is that the whole world around us is accelerating. And he claims that that's led to three major crises. The first being the environmental crisis, the second being a sort of economic crisis, a growing inequality and a gap between persons, the rich and the poor, and then of course a sort of personal identity crisis, particularly what we would consider to be burnout amongst some persons. Now, I relate that to some of the research of a friend of mine, Arne Rasmussen, who is a professor of systematic theology at the University of Gothenburg. And Arne, in his research, he wrote a Swedish article on dissenting Protestant churches and their work for good. Very interesting article in which he traces, for example, movements like the Oberlin Colony and later Oberlin College, but also the work of the Methodists, the Baptists, and other dissenting Protestants and evangelicals, and how their work has inordinately led to things like the ending of slavery, the suffragette movement, and other human rights developments. So he asked the question, why is that so? And it seems that from his case, there are three particular things. Number one, the social location of these movements. The fact that members of these communities don't find themselves located in the center of their societies, theologically or politically. Secondly, a sort of Protestant commitment, theological commitment to the possibility for change, the fact that God allows for change. And thirdly, their own spirituality, the ways in which these communities are structured to support persons to adopt these kind of dissenting views and to bring them into public life. Now, what I show is that these communities, in many senses, because of their hard work and commitment, moved from the margins to the center. And so dissenting Protestant values, evangelical values, have now become a sort of subtle mainstay in many Western societies, certainly in America, in Britain, in places like Australia, even though that's largely secular, and certainly South Africa. And one of the things that we see is that this reminds us a lot of Max Weber's work, his work on the spirit of capitalism, the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. And what Weber argued was that after the Reformation, Calvinist Protestants in particular began to question the ways in which religious leaders and religious communities mediated salvation, so that people lost confidence in that. The Protestant Reformation tried to bring that into the hands of ordinary people, and whereas previously it was only the priest or the nun who had to live a holy life, now suddenly everyone had to live a holy life. And the second thing was that work suddenly took on a different meaning. Previously it was only the priest or the nun who did holy work, but now suddenly in the Protestant Reformation, they come to recognize, for example, that, God feeds everybody, but it's the farmer who plants the crop and so participates with God through labor in bringing about this holy work. So work takes on this sort of moral, spiritual imperative. We have to work hard to do things. Now, what the dissenting Protestants added after the Reformation was they added this political element. So they came to see that if they worked hard and gained economic and political independence, they could change societies. So, for example, the freeing of slaves, or for women to gain economic independence and agency and decision over their lives. And so work takes on this increasing measure of responsibility and pressure. Now, the final bit in the puzzle is two new books, one published by Daniel Markovitz and the other by Michael J. Sandel, on merit and meritocracy. So in many societies today, particularly Western societies, we would claim that merit is a very good way to meter out reward. So for example, if you work hard, if you are gifted, you should receive a greater reward than a person who doesn't work hard or who doesn't have your abilities, talents, education, or gifts. The problem is, however, that meritocracy, So like aristocracy, meritocracy, which is a development on merit, has meant that merit and the privileges of merit have often been passed down through lineages. So for example, we see this in South Africa, that parents who had access to elite education get elite jobs, and they then can train and develop their children from birth often to gain access to elite universities, get elite educations, and do elite jobs. And what Sandel and Markovitz claim is that the meritocracy system is increasing inequality, it's insulating people from developing, and it's leaving both those who are excluded from the elite and the elites desperately exhausted. Now, how does he claim that? How do they claim that? Well, first of all, those who lose out on the merit race often find themselves systematically, structurally excluded from bettering their lives. So we find persons who are working unsatisfactory jobs, sometimes 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet, and there's no chance for them or their children to increase. And increasingly they resent the elites that keep them from developing. The percentage of persons who can better their lives through hard work and through talent is inordinately small. And then those who are in the elite positions, those who had elite educations, who are working these elite jobs, lawyers, accountants, consultants, they find themselves increasingly working harder and harder because hard work has now become a meritorious thing. It's linked to virtue. You're a good person if you work incredibly hard, and you're deemed to have received those rewards by merit. And so to protect their privileged status, we find that they're working longer hours. Often their families, their health, their social environment suffers tremendously. And so we find them facing the things that Hartmut Rosa talked about, the sort of burnout, that sense of not being able to cope. And people are suffering a great deal. So, of course, the suffering is not the same, and I'm not claiming that. But what I am trying to show is that there's a deep sense of unhappiness about the way in which these subtle values, the Protestant work ethic, and the notion of merit have found their way into our contemporary lives. And so what I want to encourage people to do, and that's what I claim in the article, is that we need to critically evaluate the values on which we build our lives. Is merit really the best way to do it? And if it's not, what are the alternatives? And how do we critically analyze those things that exclude some and burn others out and find better ways to live? So remember, this is not a lecture, it's just a thought, and these are just a couple of ideas that I've had, and it's based on a chapter for a new book which is coming out, and then the summary of the article. So thanks for watching today. I'd love to hear your thoughts and your ideas about your own work life, your own life satisfaction, and what you think about the notion of the merit trap and Protestant dissenting Christians or evangelicals. Thanks for watching.